He was the most feared man in Seoul. One word from him could end a career, collapse a company, or make a person disappear before sunrise. 300 of Korea's most powerful people stood in that ballroom holding their breath, waiting for him to choose a wife. But Kang Tae-jun didn't choose. His 6-year-old son did. And the boy, who hadn't spoken a single word in 18 months, walked past every heiress, every socialite, every woman dressed in $50,000 worth of ambition, and took the hand of a plus-sized black catering assistant from a neighborhood cafe. Then he spoke. "She's my friend. If you want to know how a silent child brought an entire criminal empire to its knees, stay with me until the end. Like this video, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." Damn. The suit cost more than most people in Seoul made in a year. Kang Tae-jun knew this not because he cared about money. He had so much of it that the number had stopped meaning anything a long time ago, but because the tailor had mentioned it twice while fitting the jacket across his shoulders, the way people mention things they want you to remember. Tae-jun had nodded without listening. He'd been watching the window, watching the city below the Hanam-dong penthouse where the lights spread out like scattered glass, and trying to remember the last time any of it felt like his. 18 months. That was the answer, though he never said it out loud. His reflection stared back from the black glass. 41 years old. A jaw that looked like it had been cut from something harder than bone. Dark eyes that had learned, somewhere along the way, to give nothing. He'd been called handsome by enough people that he'd stopped hearing it. Handsome didn't keep you warm. Handsome didn't stop the 3 a.m. Moments when he sat on the edge of his bed and counted the minutes until his son's room went quiet, and he could be sure the boy was sleeping and not lying awake in the dark, staring at nothing, the way Min-jun sometimes did. "Sir." His chief of staff, Park Hyun-soo, appeared in the doorway with the tablet already open. Hyun-soo was 34, efficient to the point of being mechanical, and had the particular talent of making everything sound like a minor administrative update even when the sky was falling. "The convoy is staged downstairs. We depart in 11 minutes. "I know." Min-jun-si is dressed and waiting with Hana in the "I know, Hyun-soo." A pause. The sound of a man deciding whether to say the next thing. The Shin family confirmed their table. Han Seo-yeon will be seated at the primary dais. Tae-jun said nothing. He reached for the glass of scotch on the window ledge, his first drink of the evening, a deliberate restraint, and finished it in a slow, even pull. "She will be expecting a conversation tonight," Hyun-soo continued. "Given the timeline the elders discussed at last month, Hyun-soo." "Sir, if you say the word elders one more time tonight, I will have you reassigned to the Busan port accounts." Another pause, shorter this time. "Understood." Tae-jun set the glass down and turned from the window. "Bring the car around, and tell Hana to make sure Min-jun has his coat. It's cold outside." The Lotte Hotel Grand Ballroom on a Thursday evening looked like someone had taken the concept of wealth and rendered it in 3 dimensions. Floor-length glass panels, chandelier clusters that probably required their own maintenance staff, tables set with floral arrangements that cost more than most small weddings, draped in ivory and deep burgundy, the color palette chosen by someone who understood that power dressed itself in restraint. 300 guests. Politicians? Prosecutors. CEOs who moved markets with a sentence, cultural figures whose faces appeared on magazine covers, and threaded through them, invisible to civilian eyes but legible to anyone who knew the language, the other kind of powerful people. The ones who did not appear in press releases, the ones whose names showed up in certain databases that certain agencies maintained very carefully and shared with very few. The Haeyong Foundation Charity Gala was officially a fundraiser for children's literacy programs across 5 Korean provinces. In practice, it was what it had been for 11 years, the annual convening of the invisible architecture that actually ran this city. You could learn more about who held real power in Seoul by watching this room for 20 minutes than by reading 6 months of newspapers. Kang Tae-jun knew this because he had built part of that architecture himself. He moved through the room the way he always moved through rooms. Not fast, not slow, not performing confidence, but simply having it in the way you have a heartbeat. People noticed him the way they noticed weather. A small current of awareness traveled through the crowd ahead of him, guests shifting without quite meaning to, conversations pausing, eyes sliding sideways and then away. His security detail held a loose perimeter, close enough to respond, far enough not to announce themselves. At his side, holding his left hand with both of his small ones, walked Min-jun. The boy was dressed in a charcoal suit that had been cut specifically for him because Tae-jun could not bring himself to dress his son in something off a rack. Not tonight. 6 years old, small for his age, dark eyes that had his mother's particular depth to them, a quality that Tae-jun could not look at directly for very long without something shifting in his chest that he refused to name. Min-jun walked quietly beside his father, watching everything around him with the attentive stillness of a child who had learned that watching was safer than participating. He hadn't spoken since the accident. 18 months, 4 days. Tae-jun had stopped counting the days around month 3, but the number had lodged itself somewhere involuntary and wouldn't leave. 4 neurologists, 2 developmental psychologists, 3 different speech therapists with 3 different approaches. The gentle one, the structured one, the one who used play therapy and came with excellent credentials from a program in Zurich. Min-jun had sat through every session with the same polite, bottomless silence. He was not deaf. His hearing was perfect. He made sounds. He laughed sometimes, a real laugh, unpredicted and brief, usually at something unexpected. He could communicate wants and dislikes with body language precise enough to be exhausting. But he did not speak. Had not spoken since the night the car went off the embankment on Bugak Skyway in the rain, and his mother's side of the vehicle met the guardrail first. Tae-jun had not been driving. He had been in a different car, a fact that saved his life and had cost him everything else. They were 20 minutes into the event when Jang Myung-chul found him. Jang was 63, silver-haired, and had the specific brand of warmth that very dangerous men cultivate when they've decided to use charm instead of force. He ran the Jang Group, which officially was a shipping conglomerate. He was also the closest thing the Seoul underworld had to a sitting chairman, a man whose approval mattered more than most people's direct power. He had known Tae-jun's father. He had, at various crucial moments, known when to back Tae-jun and when to step aside, and this had created between them the kind of relationship that was both deeply useful and faintly threatening. Tae-jun-ah. Jang used the familiar form. He always did. You look well. Chairman Jang? Tae-jun accepted the handshake, felt the dry grip, the deliberate steadiness of a man who had been measured across negotiating tables for 4 decades. Thank you for coming. As if I'd miss it. Jang's eyes dropped to Min-jun for a moment. That particular practice softness that adults adopt when they're not actually comfortable with children. And this handsome young man, you brought him tonight. That's new. His therapist suggested more social engagement. Jang straightened. The warmth dialed back slightly, leaving something more direct. She's here, you know, Seo-yeon, looking extraordinary. I'm aware. The Shin family had dinner with me last week, privately. Jang turned his glass slowly between his fingers. They're patient people, Tae-jun, but patients lose patience eventually. It's been 18 months. The organization needs stability. Everyone understands your grief, truly. Min-jun, Tae-jun looked down at his son. Can you see the dessert table from here? Min-jun looked where his father indicated, then nodded. Go ask Hana to take you. Tell her I said you can have whatever you want. The boy looked up at him with those eyes that miss nothing. Then he looked at Jang, then back at his father. He nodded again and slipped away into the crowd toward where his nanny waited near the edge of the room. Jang watched him go. He's perceptive. Yes. Smart child. Very. Then he understands. Jang set his glass down on a passing tray. That his father's position requires a structure his father currently lacks. That the absence of a partner creates instabilities. In perception. In reality. He met Tae-jun's eyes. Seo-yeon is an excellent choice. She knew Yoon-ji. She loves Min-jun. She understands what you do and what it requires. She would be stable. Tae-jun looked at him steadily for a long moment. The dessert table is calling me as well, Chairman. Excuse me. He found Seo-yeon 20 minutes later, not by seeking her out, but because she made sure to be found. That was her particular skill. The engineering of apparent accidents. Han Seo-yeon was 36 years old and beautiful in the way that required significant maintenance but concealed the maintenance perfectly. She wore dark green tonight, a color she'd always known suited her. Her hair was up. Her posture was the posture of a woman who had attended these functions since she was 17 and had memorized every register of attention this room could direct at a person. She had been Kang Yoonji's closest friend, closest confidant, her maid of honor. She had wept at the funeral with grief that was visibly real. She still visited the gravesite, Tae-jun had been informed, on the 15th of every month. She was also in love with Tae-jun. Had been, he suspected, for a long time. Whether before Yoonji's death or only after, he had never been able to determine and had never tried very hard. The question felt unkind in a direction he didn't want to push. "You look tired," she said, when they stood close enough to speak without being overheard. "Everyone's told me I look well tonight." "Everyone is lying." She looked at him directly. That was her move, the directness. Most people in his world talked sideways. Seo-yeon looked at you. "You're not sleeping." "No." "Min-jun?" "Partly." She waited. She was good at waiting. "I'm not doing this tonight, Seo-yeon." "I'm not asking you to do anything." She lifted her glass. "I'm having a conversation with someone I care about." "There's a difference." There was, and they both knew she was drawing it carefully. "How's the Shin Group's expansion treating you?" A slight smile. "Bored of me already?" "I'm never bored of you. I just know when I'm being managed. And I know when you're deflecting." She glanced across the room toward where Min-jun had found the dessert table, small and precise, ignoring the macaron tower entirely and studying the chocolate fountain with an engineer's intensity. "He's growing." "Kids do." "He looks like her." Tae-jun said nothing. "I could—" She stopped. Started again. "I would be good to him, Tae-jun. You know that. You know I already love him." "I know." "Then, I know," he repeated, and the second time it landed differently, heavier, like a door that was still open, but whose hinges had just been examined. "I know, Seo-yeon, and I'm not saying no. I'm saying, not tonight, all right? Not tonight." She studied him. Then she nodded, accepting it, storing it for later. She was always storing things for later. "Fine. Not tonight." She touched his arm, brief, deliberate. "But the room is watching, Tae-jun, and the room makes up its mind whether you participate or not." She moved away with the ease of a woman who knew exactly how she looked, walking away. The catering staff had been briefed on protocol, as they always were for events at this level. 7 companies provided various services for the gala: florals, sound, security, and catering. And the catering company's 30 employees had been given their zones, their timelines, their contact points within the hotel staff, and one standing rule. If you were in the ballroom, you were invisible. You kept moving. You kept smiling when smiled at. You did not initiate conversation. You did not take photographs. And you absolutely did not make eye contact with specific individuals on the security-flagged guest list that had been distributed to team leads on a need-to-know basis. Nia Brooks had read the briefing sheet twice on the shuttle from the staging area. She'd read it twice because she did everything at least twice. Her daughter Amara called it the double-check curse. Nia called it Tuesday. She was 32 years old, 5'6", and had the particular build that clothing catalogs had recently started calling full-figured, and that Nia privately called none of your business. She'd been in Seoul for 4 years. Came over on a teaching contract that had ended after 2 years, stayed because Amara had started school and made friends, and the thought of uprooting her again, Nia had done the math on what another move would cost her daughter and found she couldn't pay it. She worked days at a small neighborhood cafe in Mapogu called Hadori's. She picked up catering shifts on evenings and weekends through a hospitality agency that placed English-speaking staff at international events. The money was not enough, and then some months it was almost enough, and that was the arithmetic of her life, the one she'd been running since Amara's father had decided, when Amara was 8 months old, that he was better suited to a life without the variables. She did not think about him very often anymore, or she thought about him in the way you think about weather you've already been through, aware it happened, no longer afraid of it. Tonight she was working the East Circulation Corridor, which meant passing trays of canapés through the outer edge of the main ballroom and keeping the champagne flutes above half full for the cluster of tables in sections D through F. It was not complicated work. It required good shoes, the ability to read a room without participating in it, and a specific kind of patience that Nia had developed to the point of something like art. She had been at it for 90 minutes and was loading a fresh tray at the service station near the corridor entrance when she first saw the child. He was alone, which was the first thing that registered. Not alone in a concerning way. There was a nanny-aged woman, about 15 feet away, checking her phone, but alone in the particular way of children who've decided that the adults in their immediate vicinity have nothing interesting to offer. He'd gotten away from the dessert table somehow and was standing near a tall window at the edge of the ballroom, looking out at the city lights. He was, Nia noticed, the only person in this entire room who was looking out instead of in. She thought nothing of it and continued loading her tray. She came back through the same corridor 12 minutes later, and he was still there. Same position, same stillness. The nanny was now talking to someone, peripherally aware but distracted. Nia slowed. Not stopped. She didn't stop, because that would have been unusual enough to draw attention, but she slowed, passing near his window on the return route, and looked at him the way she sometimes looked at Amara when her daughter was thinking hard about something and didn't know she was being observed. The boy had his forehead almost touching the glass. His breath made small fog patches that appeared and dissolved. He was watching something in his own reflection, or past it, or perhaps nothing at all. Then he blinked and looked at her. She should have moved on. The briefing sheet was very clear, but something in his face, the absoluteness of the stillness in it, the quality of attention he turned on her that was nothing like a 6-year-old's attention was supposed to be, made her pause one beat too long. She nodded at him, the way you'd nod to an adult, not the condescending head tilt you gave children when you were being kind to them, but an actual acknowledgement, like, I see you, you exist. That's fine. He stared at her for another second. Then he looked back at the window. Nia moved on. She thought about him on the ride home. She thought about the way he'd looked at the city like he was solving something. The announcement came at 9:47 p.m., between the appetizer service and the main course, at the precise moment that 300 people were most captive and most comfortable. Tae-jun had timed it, if not consciously, then by instinct. The instinct of a man who had spent 20 years knowing when rooms were most malleable. He had not planned to make an announcement. That was the part he would have the most trouble explaining afterward, to himself and to everyone else. What happened was this. Chairman Jang had been circling back. Not alone this time. He'd brought 2 other senior figures, the kind of approach that transformed a suggestion into a consensus, that reframed an individual opinion as the weight of collective expectation. They'd found Tae-jun near the main bar, and the conversation had started pleasantly enough, and then the pleasantness had dropped away by degree until what was left was something blunter and less patient. The organization cannot be led by a man who appears untethered, one of them said. Park Jun-ho, 68. Ran 3 trade unions that functioned as revenue streams for 4 different criminal enterprises. He'd known Tae-jun's father better than Tae-jun himself had. We say this with respect. With deep respect, Jung added. The Shin family's patience has genuine limits, and Seoyeon has declined 2 other significant offers this past year in anticipation of, I understand, Tae-jun said. Then, I understand what you're saying. He set his glass down. I'll give you an answer tonight. That had satisfied them enough to back off. And he had turned away from the bar and looked at the room. 300 faces, every one of them connected to something he'd built or protected or bought or threatened at some point in the past 2 decades. And he'd felt, with a clarity that surprised him, something that was almost rage. Not at them specifically, at the whole architecture. The structure that required his grief to have a deadline and his son's silence to be an inconvenience to be managed. The machinery that turned everything, even love, even loss, into a resource allocation problem. He found Min-jun near the edge of the room. The boy was sitting now, on a low step near one of the side exits, and his nanny, Hana, was crouched beside him, looking concerned in the gentle way that meant she'd tried to move him, and he'd refused. Tae-jun approached and crouched down to Min-jun's level. You all right? Min-jun looked at him, nodded once. You want to go home? A pause. Then, a small shake of the head. Tae-jun studied him. There were times, not often enough, when he could read something in his son's face that functioned like language. Right now it said, not yet, not done yet. He didn't know what that meant, but he stayed crouched a moment longer than he needed to, and in that moment something settled in him, something that was probably a mistake. He stood. He looked at Hyun-soo, who had materialized nearby with the tablet. Get me the room microphone. Hyun-soo blinked. Sir? The wireless microphone the MC used for the welcome remarks. Get it for me. A very brief pause that contained several unasked questions. Yes, sir. 3 minutes later, Kang Tae-jun stood in the center of the Lotte Grand Ballroom with a microphone and 300 people looking at him. He had spoken to audiences before. Press conferences, board meetings, negotiations with people who would have preferred to shoot him. He was not a man who feared rooms. I want to thank the Hae-young Foundation for another remarkable evening, he began, which was expected, which was the thing you said, and people nodded, and the room settled into the posture of polite attention. And I want to address something that several of you have asked me about in various forms over the past year and a half. The room's quality of attention shifted, subtly, like a change in air pressure. There has been pressure, he smiled, a thin thing, without warmth. From many people I respect, to remarry, to provide the organization with what several colleagues have described to me tonight as stability. He let the words sit there. I understand the concern. I share it, in fact. Minjun deserves a complete family, and I have spent 18 months unable to make this decision. Silence. Complete. So tonight I am going to resolve it, once and for all. He looked around the room, found Seoyeon's face in the crowd, her expression composed but her eyes sharp, reading him. I have decided. I will marry. He paused. The woman my son chooses. A beat. Someone laughed nervously, then stopped. Many of you know that Minjun hasn't spoken since his mother's accident. Tae-jun's voice was even, completely even. A child who doesn't speak cannot choose. So you see, I have found a solution that satisfies everyone's desire for a timeline while respecting my own need for... He searched for the word. Patience. The room understood him. He saw it move through the crowd like a slow wave, the comprehension, and then the careful recalibration. He had just made an unkeepable promise, and everyone in the room was smart enough to know it. It was elegant, in its way, ironclad without being cruel. It acknowledged the pressure and rendered it structurally inoperable. He lowered the microphone. And in the silence that followed, that particular held-breath silence of a room digesting something, a small hand took his. Tae-jun looked down. Minjun was standing beside him. He had, at some point in the past 3 minutes, left the step near the side exit and crossed the room. Hana stood 10 feet away with the expression of someone who had failed to prevent something inevitable. Minjun was looking at something across the room. Tae-jun followed his son's gaze. The east corridor, where the catering staff moved in their quiet, efficient rotation. Where a woman in a white service jacket was pausing near the entrance, tray held level, having stopped mid-step the moment the microphone had clicked on. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Minjun. The boy moved. That was the part Nia would replay for weeks afterward. Not what came after, but the movement itself. The deliberateness of it. A 6-year-old walking through a ballroom full of adults who had stopped breathing, and the walk was not a child's walk. It had direction. It had intention. It was the walk of someone who had already made a decision and was now executing it. She tried to move, to step back, to redirect, to do any of the 17 things the briefing sheet suggested she should do when there was any kind of incident in the ballroom. Her feet did not cooperate. He stopped in front of her. He was so small. She thought this stupidly, loudly, in the part of her brain that was still functioning. He is so small, standing there in his little charcoal suit, looking up at her with his mother's eyes. She didn't know they were his mother's eyes, not yet, not for weeks, like he was checking something off a list he'd been keeping a long time. Then he reached up and took her free hand, the one that wasn't holding the tray. 300 people did not breathe. Nia opened her mouth, found nothing. Then the boy said, in a voice that was small and slightly rough, like a voice that hadn't been used in a while and needed to warm up, "She's my friend." The microphone was still live, still in Tae-jun's hand across the room. The words went everywhere. Nia heard them land in the room the way a stone lands in still water. The sound, then the circle, then the circles inside circles. She heard someone inhale sharply. She heard a glass being set down too hard. She heard the specific silence of 300 intelligent people absorbing something that had just changed what kind of evening this was. She looked down at the boy. He was looking back at her, steady, unafraid, as though he'd planned this, as though this was always exactly where this evening was going to arrive. From across the room she felt the weight of a gaze that belonged to someone large, in every sense of the word large, and she looked up and found the eyes of a man who was standing absolutely still with a microphone in his hand and an expression she'd never seen before on any human face. It was not shock, exactly. It was something rawer than that. Something that looked like a man watching the world do something he hadn't told it to do, something he maybe hadn't thought it was capable of doing, and not knowing yet whether that was a catastrophe or the opposite. She looked back down at the boy. "Hi," she said, because it was all she had. He almost smiled, just at the edges. Then he looked down at their joined hands with the focused satisfaction of someone who had completed a difficult and necessary task. The room erupted, not in applause, in sound. The controlled explosion of 300 suppressed reactions releasing simultaneously. Voices, movement, a kind of controlled chaos that Nia could feel in her sternum. She didn't hear the first accusation because it came from somewhere behind her. She heard the second one because it came from in front of her, and it came from Han Seoyeon, who had crossed half the ballroom in the time it took the noise to start, and whose composure was still intact, but whose eyes were doing something different. "This is disgraceful," Seoyeon said. Her voice was pitched to carry. It carried. "He's a grieving child, and this woman—" Her gaze moved across Nia with the precise efficiency of a scalpel. "This woman has clearly—" "She didn't do anything," Taejun's voice, still through the microphone, without meaning to be. He'd forgotten he was holding it. Seoyeon stopped. "She didn't do anything," he said again, quieter, the microphone picking it up and losing it into the noise. He looked at his son. "Minjun." The boy looked up at him. "Come here." Minjun considered this. Then he looked at Nia, then at his father. Then he moved to his father's side and took his hand, and the room watched this like it was the most important geography anyone had ever navigated. Nia stood where she was, tray still level, something in her chest doing something complicated that she didn't have language for yet. Seoyeon turned back to the room, found enough stillness to speak to it. "A catering employee," she said, clearly, deliberately. "Walking into this event, into this family, into this child's grief. And we are celebrating this?" The room began to turn. Nia could feel it, the social physics of 300 people deciding what kind of story this was. And she was a catering worker, and she didn't have credentials, and she didn't have connections, and from where this room was standing, she could see exactly what she looked like. She knew what this looked like. She put the tray down on the nearest table, carefully. She would not drop it. Then she crossed the ballroom. People moved for her, or she moved around them. She wasn't sure which. She arrived in front of Minjun and she crouched down to his level, the way she crouched in front of Amara when she needed her daughter to hear something real. "Hey," she said, low. "For him, not the room. What you just did, that was brave, okay? That was really brave." Minjun looked at her. "Your voice matters." She held his gaze. "You remember that?" He nodded, once, certain. She stood up. She looked at the room, all of it, the whole sweeping, expensive mess of it, the faces and the dresses and the architecture of power and the woman in the dark green who was watching her with something that was not quite hatred but lived in the same neighborhood. "He didn't choose a wife for his father tonight." She said it to Seoyeon, but she said it to all of them. "He chose a friend for himself." She picked up the tray. She walked out of the Lotte Grand Ballroom, through the service corridor, into the cold November air of the parking level, and sat on a concrete barrier and shook for a solid 4 minutes before she remembered she still had 40 minutes left on her shift. She went back in and finished her shift. She did not see Kang Tae-jun again that night. She told herself this was fine. She told herself this was over. She told herself the strange gravity she'd felt across a ballroom was just adrenaline and context and the inherent drama of rich people's events. She told herself these things on the shuttle home. She told herself on the walk from the stop to her apartment building. She told herself while she paid the babysitter and checked on Amara, sleeping in the small bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars she'd put on the ceiling when they first moved in. She stood in her daughter's doorway and looked at those stars for a long time. The boy's voice in that ballroom, small, rough, certain. First words in 18 months, and he'd used them on a catering worker from Mapogu. "She's my friend." Nia turned off the hallway light and went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. In the back of the convoy returning to Hanam-dong, Minjun sat beside his father and watched the city go past the window. His hands were folded in his lap. His breathing was even. Taejun sat very still beside him. He had not spoken since they got in the car. Hyun-soo was in the front seat and had the particular quality of a man sitting on several questions he'd decided not to ask tonight. Hana was following in a second vehicle. The convoy moved through Seoul in its standard formation, unhurried. After 17 minutes, Min-jun spoke. His second time, same evening, the voice still rough at the edges, still warming up. "Appa." Taejun looked at him. "She has a daughter." A beat. "What?" "Her daughter's name is Amara." Min-jun kept looking at the window. "She's 7. They live in Mapo." Taejun stared at his son. "She makes hot chocolate exactly when the dog comes past the window." The boy tilted his head slightly. "She never even told me she was timing it, but she was." The city lights moved past. Seoul at 11 p.m., indifferent and endless. "Min-jun," Taejun's voice came out careful. "How long have you known her?" A pause that felt deliberate. The boy turned and looked at his father with an expression that, on a 6-year-old's face, should not have been possible. It was the expression of someone who had been paying very close attention for a very long time. "Long enough," he said. And then he looked back at the window and did not speak again for the rest of the drive. Taejun sat in the dark of the moving car and understood, for the first time, that his 6-year-old son had just outmaneuvered him. And the whole city, to be honest. He didn't know yet what it cost. He didn't know what was coming. The headlines, the pressure, the machinery of his own world turning against a woman who'd done nothing more than acknowledge a child. He didn't know what Seoyeon was already planning in the back of her own car, the words she was already choosing, the people she was already calling. He knew his son had spoken. He knew it felt, in the cold and quiet of the convoy, like something breaking open. Whether that was a beginning or a catastrophe, or both, as these things often were, he had not yet decided. But Min-jun was looking at the window again, and something in the set of his small shoulders had changed. Something that had been braced for 18 months was not braced anymore. And Kang Tae-jun, who had faced down prosecutors and rival bosses and the endless grinding machinery of a life built in shadow, sat in his armored car and felt the back of his eyes sting, and did not wipe them because his son might look over and he was not ready. He was not ready for any of this, which meant, almost certainly, that it had already started. The headlines broke before midnight. Not the morning papers. Those still had editors and timelines and the last remnants of a process that required at least the appearance of verification. The headlines that broke before midnight were the ones that lived on phone screens, the ones that traveled through group chats and private accounts, and the specific ecosystem of Seoul's social media architecture that operated at the speed of rumor and the ethics of none. Mafia boss's mute son speaks. Chooses catering worker at charity gala. Black woman crashes Hae-young gala. Kang Tae-jun's son makes shocking scene. Who is the woman who manipulated the Black Tiger's grieving child? The third headline was Seoyeon's work. Taejun didn't know this yet when Hyun-soo brought the tablet to him at 12:40 a.m. in his home office, but he knew it the way you know certain things. Not from evidence, but from the texture of the thing, the particular shape of a blade you recognized from its angle. He read all 3 without expression. Set the tablet down. How many outlets? 14 as of 20 minutes ago. Hyun-soo stood with his hands behind his back. Projected to be 40 plus by 6 a.m. The international feed picked up the English language version of the third story. It's been reshared approximately. The woman. Nia Brooks. He said the name carefully. He'd asked Hyun-soo for it in the car, and the man had produced it inside 4 minutes, which told Taejun that someone on his security detail had already been running background before they'd cleared the hotel parking level. What do we have? American citizen, 32, single mother, 1 daughter, 7 years old, named Amara Brooks. 4 years in Seoul, initially on a teaching contract through the Goun Language Institute, contract ended 2 years ago, remained in country on a standard long-term residency. Currently employed at a cafe in Mapogu, Hadori's, on Wogok Row, and registered with a hospitality staffing agency called Sojong Events for part-time catering work. No criminal record, no significant financial entanglements. She has, he checked the tablet, $1,100 in a Korean bank account and approximately $600 in a U.S. account she hasn't touched in 2 years. Taejun said nothing for a moment. That's everything. That's everything relevant. She's not connected to any organization, any rival group, any journalist or political entity. She has no social media presence beyond a dormant personal account she hasn't posted to in 3 years. Hyunsu paused. She is, by every metric we use, completely unremarkable. That's not what I'd call her. Hyunsu waited. Go home, Hyunsu. Sir, the communication strategy for tomorrow. Tomorrow, go home. A beat. Then, yes, sir. When the door closed, Taejun sat in the quiet of his office and looked at the city through the floor-length windows. The same city he'd watched from this window for 5 years, from this apartment he'd bought with Yoonji when Min-jun was 10 months old, because she'd loved the light in the mornings. The way it came over the ridge and hit the Han in long, flat lines. He picked the tablet back up and found the third headline again. Who is the woman who manipulated the Black Tiger's grieving child? The article had a photo, taken at the gala, from someone's phone, bad angle, slightly blurred, but unmistakable. Nia Brooks crouched in front of Min-jun in the middle of the Lotte Grand ballroom, her hand near his face, the boy looking at her with the expression Taejun had never once managed to produce in 18 months of trying. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put the tablet face down on the desk and went to check on his son. Min-jun was asleep. He was sleeping the way he'd been sleeping for the past 18 months, on his side, facing the wall, knees pulled up, the particular tight configuration of a child who had learned to take up as little space as possible, even in unconsciousness. There was a nightlight near the baseboard that cast everything in a dim blue that Taejun had chosen because it was neutral and calm, and he'd read somewhere that blue spectrum nightlights were better for sleep cycles. He'd read a lot of things. He'd read everything anyone had written about childhood trauma responses and selective mutism and complicated grief, and he'd absorbed it all and applied none of it successfully. He stood in the doorway for 2 minutes. Then he went back down the hall and sat on the floor outside his son's door with his back against the wall and his knees up, and stayed there until the sky outside the window started to lighten. So, the cafe opened at 7:30. Hadori's was the kind of place that existed in the specific register of small Seoul neighborhood establishments that had been there long enough to feel like furniture. Not trendy, not photographed, not the subject of any blog post. 14 tables. A counter with 4 stools. A handwritten menu that hadn't changed significantly in 3 years. The owner, a woman in her late 50s named Kim Bok-soon, who everyone called Auntie Kim, had opened it after her husband died and run it with the particular determined quietness of a person who has simplified their life down to what they can actually control. Nia arrived at 7:15 to set up. She had slept approximately 3 hours. She knew this because she'd looked at her phone at 4 a.m., and then again at 5:40, and then given up at 6:10 and gotten Amara ready for school while the headlines multiplied on her screen. She'd stopped reading them at the 4th one. She'd closed the apps and put her phone in her bag and kept it there while she walked Amara to the school gate and kissed her daughter's forehead and watched her go through the door. "You okay, Yama?" Amara had asked. In Korean, because Amara's Korean was now better than her English, and this sometimes ambushed Nia at unexpected moments with a feeling she couldn't name. "I'm good, baby. Go learn things." That's not an answer. That's exactly an answer. Go. She'd watched the gate close. Then she'd stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and breathed for 30 seconds before walking to the cafe. Auntie Kim was already behind the counter when Nia arrived, measuring coffee grounds with the precision of someone who had been doing it long enough that it was muscle memory. She looked up when Nia came in, registered something in Nia's face, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I saw." Nia hung her coat on the hook near the service door. "Auntie Kim, I don't need an explanation." The older woman set the grounds down. "I just want to know you're all right." "I'm fine." "Nia, I'm functional. That's the best I've got right now." Auntie Kim looked at her for another moment, then turned back to the coffee machine with the decisive air of someone who had decided to accept this answer provisionally. The boy spoke. "That's what the news is saying." "Yes." "First time in 18 months, yes. And he chose you." Nia opened the pastry case and started arranging the morning delivery. Her hands were steady. She was proud of her hands. "He chose to say something to me. It's not the same thing. The entire country seems to think it is. The entire country is not my problem." The bell above the door chimed. First customer of the morning, Mr. Choi from the dry cleaner 2 doors down. Americano, no sugar, same as every day. He came in and looked at Nia with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, something between recognition and uncertainty, like she was a person he'd thought he knew the full shape of and had just discovered new dimensions to. "Morning," she said. "Morning, Miss Nia." He sat at his usual stool. His eyes went to her face and then away. "Usual, please." The morning passed in this register, familiar rhythms underneath a new layer of static, the way a song sounds when it's coming from a room where something has happened. The regulars came in. Some of them said nothing. Some of them asked with varying degrees of directness. Nia answered the direct ones briefly and let the indirect ones dissolve. At 9:53, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. It rang again 11 minutes later. Different number. She let that one go too. By 10:45, she had 7 voicemails she hadn't listened to and 4 texts from a journalist at a media company she'd never heard of asking for comment. She turned her phone off. At 11:20, 3 people came into the cafe who were not regulars. 2 women and a man, mid-30s to mid-40s, dressed in the specific register of people who did not usually visit Mapogu neighborhood cafes. They sat at the window table and ordered coffees they didn't touch, and looked at their phones and once in a while looked at Nia in the way that people look when they're deciding whether to say a thing. The man said it first, "Ms. Brooks." He didn't have an accent. His Korean was educated, precise. "My name is Jeong Tae-wook. I'm a communications consultant. I'd like to speak with you if you have a few minutes." Nia put 2 cups of coffee on the counter for a pickup order. "I don't." "It would be in your interest." "Sir?" She turned to look at him directly. "I'm at work. I'm not interested in speaking with a communications consultant. Please enjoy your coffee." He held her gaze for a moment, reading her, recalibrating. Then he nodded once and looked back at his phone. The 2 women exchanged a glance. They stayed for 40 minutes. When they left, the man put a business card on the table. She threw it away without reading it. Han Seoyeon's apartment was in Cheongdam-dong, on the 12th floor of a building where the lobby had a permanent floral arrangement that cost more per week than Nia's monthly rent. She'd moved there 3 years ago, after the last of her family money had been consolidated into the kind of investments that made money regardless of whether you paid attention to them, which meant she could afford to pay attention to other things. She sat at her dining table at 11 a.m. with her laptop open and her phone beside it and a cup of tea she'd made and not drunk, and she made calls. She made them carefully. She was always careful. Careful was the thing she was, the deep structural thing. She thought before she spoke. She chose words the way a jeweler chose settings, and she never, not once in her adult life, had said something she couldn't later recontextualize. This was not coldness. She genuinely believed this was intelligence. The intelligence of a woman who had grown up learning that the space between what you meant and what you could prove you'd said was the only safe space available. The first call was to a journalist. The second was to a woman who ran a popular commentary channel with 3 million subscribers, and the specific talent for making contempt sound like concern. The third was to her cousin who worked in immigration administration, not to do anything, not yet, but just to ask, in the friendly way of cousins catching up, what the process was for reviewing a long-term residency status in cases of, say, fraud or misrepresentation. Just academic interest. Just conversation. She closed the laptop and finally drank her tea and looked at the city from her window and thought about Yoonji. She did this every day. It was not performance. She had loved Yoonji with the fierce particular love of someone who had found, in adult life, a true friend, which was rare enough to be worth protecting. She had loved her completely. And after the accident, she had spent 6 months in the private hell of grief that had no structure, no protocol, and no one to share it with because she was not the widow and she was not the bereaved child, she was just the friend, which was the grief without a category. And then she had looked at Taejun, still standing in the wreckage of it, alone, and she had allowed herself to consider whether something could be built from the aftermath of loss, whether the love she had left, rerouted, could find a shape. She had not forced it. She'd been patient. She had been so patient, a catering worker from Mapogu. She picked up her phone and made a 4th call. The story hit the international feeds at 2 p.m. By 3, it had been picked up by 3 English-language news aggregators in the US, 1 in the UK, and a human interest platform in Nigeria that specialized in diaspora stories. The Nigerian piece was the one that went furthest, shareable, warmly written, leaning into the specific narrative fuel of a black woman being chosen by a child in a room full of wealth and power. Within 6 hours, It had 140,000 shares. The Korean pieces leaned differently. Nia read none of them. She found this out later from Auntie Kim, who had been quietly monitoring throughout the afternoon with the systematic thoroughness of a woman who had lived long enough to know that ignoring a storm and being unprepared for it were different things. What Auntie Kim did not tell Nia, not that day, was that someone had posted the cafe's address in 3 separate online comment threads with the note, "This is where she works, if anyone is interested." She'd seen it at 2:15 and by 2:30 had put a handwritten sign in the window that said, "Closed for private event," and locked the front door and served only the regulars who knocked, which she could afford to do because she was 60 years old and had survived enough to know which battles required retreat. Nia worked the afternoon behind the locked door and didn't know any of this until later. He came at 3:45. Not Tae-jun. She wouldn't have been ready for that, and some part of her knew that, the part that was still operational beneath the exhaustion. The person who arrived at 3:45 was a man she'd never seen before, late 40s, slightly overweight, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit across the shoulders, carrying a folder that he held in both hands as if it might fly away. Auntie Kim unlocked the door and assessed him with 4 seconds of direct eye contact before deciding he was not dangerous and letting him in. He introduced himself as Bae Seong-il, an attorney. He sat across from Nia at the corner table and opened the folder. "I represent several clients in the matter of last night's incident," he began. Then, when her expression stayed flat, "I want to be direct with you, Ms. Brooks. There are people with significant resources who are currently very focused on your immigration status. Your residency permit is in a category that is not fragile exactly, but reviewable. There are also potential allegations being assembled regarding, and this is not my personal characterization, alleged undue influence over a minor." Nia's hands were flat on the table. She did not move them. "Undue influence," she said. "I know." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It's not a credible charge, but credibility is not the operative factor when the person assembling the allegation has certain... Who sent you?" He paused. "I'm not able to... Is it Han Seo-yeon?" He closed the folder. "I'm not here to harm you, Ms. Brooks. I'm here to present a path that protects you and your daughter from a situation that could become... What's the path?" He met her eyes. "A statement. To the press, tonight. That you had no prior relationship with the Kang family, that the child's behavior was unexpected and unwelcome, and that you have no interest in any connection to Kang Tae-jun or his organization. A statement that I don't want anything from them. Essentially." "It would be true." "Yes." He looked almost relieved. "Then why," Nia said, her voice very controlled, "do I need to say it publicly? Under pressure. To make it stop." She leaned forward slightly. "Because here's what it sounds like from where I'm sitting. It sounds like someone powerful is very uncomfortable, and they'd like me to perform a particular kind of smallness on camera to make them comfortable again." She pulled the folder toward her and pushed it back. "No." Bae Seong-il looked at her for a long moment. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, "Amara's school." The air changed. "What?" Nia said. "I'm not threatening you. I want to be very clear about that. I am informing you that there are people, not me, not my clients directly, who have been discussing certain channels of social pressure that could include the environment surrounding your daughter's school, harassment from other parents, public attention directed at..." "Stop." Her voice was flat and very quiet. "Stop talking." He stopped. She sat in the silence for 5 seconds. 10. The cafe was perfectly still around them. Through the locked door, she could hear the street outside. A delivery scooter, someone's distant conversation, the city proceeding without her. "Get out of my cafe," she said. "Ms. Brooks, I said get out." He got out. She sat at the table after he left and did not move for a long time. Auntie Kim appeared at the edge of the kitchen doorway and looked at her and didn't say anything. The older woman could read rooms, and she read this one and disappeared back into the kitchen. Nia put her hands on the table, looked at them. Her left hand was trembling slightly. Not much, barely visible, but she could feel it. She pressed it flat against the wood until it stopped. Amara's school. She was so tired. That was the first coherent thought. Not anger, not fear. Just the deep bodily exhaustion of a woman who had been carrying things alone for so long that her spine had started to believe this was its natural configuration, and now something new had been loaded onto it in the dark. Something she hadn't seen coming, and her body was reporting the weight before her mind had finished processing the shape of it. She picked up her phone, turned it on. 14 missed calls, 23 texts. She scrolled past all of them and pulled up the school's contact number and called. The secretary answered on the second ring, and Nia asked, in a voice she made calm through an act of will she would not afterward be able to fully account for, whether Amara had had a normal day and whether there had been any unusual visitors or contacts at the gate. Normal day, the secretary said. No unusual anything. Thank you, Nia said. She'll be picked up at the regular time. She hung up. She sat for another moment. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go. Then something. Instinct, exhaustion, the specific recklessness of a person who has just absorbed one thing too many, made her answer it. Miss Brooks. The voice was a man's. Low, careful, no wasted syllables. This is Kang Tae-jun. The cafe was very quiet. I got your number from my security team's report, he continued. I apologize for that. I know it's an intrusion. She said nothing. I need to speak with you. In person. A pause. Not the pause of a man performing patience, but the pause of someone choosing words in real time. I think you're already dealing with the consequences of last night. I think they're going to get worse, and I think that's my responsibility. Your son's, she said. My son acted because of choices I made. The vow I made. That's on me. Another pause. Please, somewhere public if you prefer. Somewhere with other people around. He stopped, restarted. I owe you a conversation. She looked at the locked door of the cafe, at the sign in the window, at the address that was already posted online in comment threads she didn't know about yet, at her phone screen where Amara's contact photo was still up from the last call, her daughter's face, grinning gap-toothed at something off camera, unaware that her mother's world had been rearranged overnight by a silent child in a charcoal suit. Tomorrow, Nia said. There's a park near the Mapo ferry terminal. It's usually empty in the mornings. 8 a.m. A long pause. I'll be there, he said. She hung up. She sat very still in the quiet of the locked cafe, and for the first time since the ballroom, let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just agreed to. The problem was that she wasn't sure, even now, sitting in the accumulated silence of a decision she could not unmake, whether she'd said yes because it was strategic, or because she was exhausted, or because a boy's voice in a crowded room was still sitting in her chest like something she hadn't found the room for yet. She didn't know, and not knowing scared her more than Seoyeon's lawyers, because you could prepare for a threat. What you couldn't prepare for was the thing you'd been trying not to want. The park near Mapo Ferry Terminal at 8 in the morning was the kind of empty that November makes. Not peaceful empty, but stripped empty, the trees down to their last leaves, the Han running gray and flat beyond the embankment, the benches wet from overnight condensation that hadn't decided whether to be frost or just cold. Nia arrived 7 minutes early. She told herself this was habit. She always arrived early. It had nothing to do with wanting to see him coming from a distance, to have those few seconds of being the one who was already there, already settled, already committed to a posture before he could read her arriving into it. She told herself this and mostly believed it, and sat on the least wet bench and watched the river. He arrived at 8 exactly. No convoy, no security perimeter she could detect, though she suspected there were people somewhere, in the parking area maybe, or along the embankment path, that she couldn't see. He was in dark clothes, nothing that announced itself, and he walked like a man who had decided to be somewhere and was now being there, no preamble. He sat at the other end of the bench without asking if he could, not rude, just the behavior of someone who had never had to ask for space. They sat for a moment in the cold. Thank you for coming, he said. You said you owed me a conversation. I do. Then talk. He looked at the river. His jaw had a tension in it that was probably permanent, she thought, the kind that stopped being an expression and became a feature after enough years. A lawyer contacted you yesterday. It wasn't a question. Yes. He wasn't sent by me. I know. He said he represented several clients. I figured out one of them. Seoyeon. He said the name flatly. Not defensive, not apologetic, just acknowledging the geography. She acted without my knowledge. I want to be clear about that. Okay? I'm going to handle it. Mr. Kang. Nia turned to look at him directly. He was closer than she'd registered. The bench wasn't long. I don't need you to handle it. I need to understand what I'm dealing with so I can handle it myself. There's a difference. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Fair. The lawyer mentioned my daughter's school. A stillness came over him that was different from his usual stillness. This one had something behind it. He mentioned it how? As a vector, social pressure from other parents, attention directed at her environment. She kept her voice even. It cost her. I need to know if that's a real threat or a scare tactic. Taejun was quiet for 3 seconds. 4. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped half a register. It won't happen. You can't guarantee. Yes, I can. He met her eyes. I can guarantee it. It won't happen. She looked at him for a long moment, running the calculus. Whether to believe a man she'd met once in a ballroom and spoken to for 40 seconds before his world exploded into hers. Whether the certainty in his voice was the certainty of competence or the certainty of ego. She decided provisionally that it didn't matter, because he was the only variable she could actually affect right now, and provisional trust was better than strategic paralysis. Your son, she said. How is he? Something changed. Immediately, thoroughly, like a different person had just been handed the same body. He's talking. He said it with the disorientation of someone reporting a miracle they hadn't processed yet. Not constantly, but he asked Hana this morning what was for breakfast and told her he didn't want eggs. That's huge. I know. For him, not for... She stopped, restarted. I mean, that's about him. Not about last night or the attention or any of the... I know what you mean. He was watching her now with that particular attention she'd felt across the ballroom. Up close, it was more specific, less overwhelming, but no less complete. He talked about you, in the car going home. He knew your daughter's name. He knew the dog's schedule. Nia absorbed this. He came into the cafe. A few times. With you, I assume. About 11 times over 4 months? I didn't. She paused. I didn't know who he was. I mean, I knew he was someone's kid, someone important. The security detail kind of announced that, but I didn't know whose. Would it have mattered? She thought about it honestly. It might have made me more careful, more distant. She looked back at the river. He didn't need careful and distant. No. Taejun's voice was quiet. He didn't. The river moved past them. A heron landed on the embankment railing 20 meters away, looked at the water with professional focus, and flew off without finding anything. I'm not interested in your money, Nia said, or your position, or whatever. She gestured vaguely at the general concept of him. I need you to understand that clearly, because I think a lot of what's happening right now is people who don't believe that, and I don't know how to prove it except by saying it. I believe it. Just like that? Minjun chose you. He said it simply. My son is the most perceptive person I have ever met. He is 6 years old, and he is already a better judge of character than anyone in my organization. A pause. So yes, just like that. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it somewhere she'd deal with later and said, what happens now? With the press, in the next 24 hours, it gets louder before it gets quieter. With Seoyeon, he stopped. I need to deal with that directly. With you and your daughter, I want to... He seemed to search for the right word and not find it immediately. I want to make sure you're not paying for something you didn't choose to be part of. I did choose something. I answered a child. She looked at him. That choice I stand by. Everything after it, I didn't choose. No, he said. You didn't. They sat in the cold for another minute. Somewhere on the river, a boat horn sounded, distant and low, and the sound traveled across the water and arrived at the bench a second after it should have. I have to get to work, Nia said. He nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. Plain, no logo, just a number handwritten in ink. Not my office line. My direct phone if anything happens. If anyone comes to the cafe or to the school or contacts you in any way that feels threatening. He held it out. She looked at it. Then she took it. She stood. He stood also, the automatic courtesy of it. They were closer standing than sitting, and she was aware of this in the specific way you become aware of someone's physical presence when your body has registered something your head hasn't given permission for yet. Mr. Kang. Taejun. Mr. Kang. She said it firmly. Not hostile. Just setting the boundary of the thing. Take care of your son. That's what matters here. I know. Make sure he knows it wasn't wrong. What he did. However it all shakes out, he needs to know his voice was worth using. Taejun looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read and didn't try to. I'll tell him, he said. She walked back along the embankment path toward the street and did not look back. She was proud of not looking back. It took more than she expected. The story broke differently at 10:47 a.m. Not the human interest angle, not the romantic speculation, not the underworld boss and catering worker framing that the Korean feeds had been running since midnight. This was different. This was a 40-minute video posted to a commentary channel with 3 million subscribers. A woman named Cho Ye-jin, who had built her audience on the specific combination of investigative aesthetics and prosecutorial confidence that made opinion feel like fact when you were consuming it at speed. The video was titled, The Truth About Nia Brooks. What the Media Isn't Telling You. Nia found out about it at 11:22 when Auntie Kim turned the small television behind the counter to a news channel that was running clips of it and said, in a voice stripped of all editorial content, "You should see this." The core of it was this. Cho Ye-jin had obtained or claimed to have obtained documentation suggesting that Nia Brooks had applied for Korean permanent residency 6 months ago and been denied on unspecified grounds. That she was currently operating on a visa with 8 months remaining. That she had, according to an unnamed source within the Hayoung Foundation's event staff, been asking questions about the guest list before the gala, specifically whether Kang Tae-jun would be attending. Then the photographs. There were 3 of them, time-stamped, clear. Taken, it appeared, from somewhere across the street, a long lens, patient. They showed the exterior of Hadori's cafe. They showed, in one image, a black car with tinted windows parked outside. In the second, a child exiting that car. In the third, time-stamped 16 minutes after the second, the same child exiting the cafe. The implication was stated plainly, without qualifier. Nia Brooks had repeated contact with Kang Tae-jun's son over a period of months, at her place of work. Whether this contact was accidental or engineered is a question the public deserves to have answered. Nia stood in front of the small television and did not move for 30 seconds. The photographs were real. Of course they were real. Min-jun had been to the cafe 11 times. That was not a fabrication. The car was real. The child exiting it was real. But the framing around them had been constructed with such precision, each true element placed in exactly the angle that made it look like something it wasn't, that the reality of the components made the lie feel true. Someone had been photographing the cafe for months. She thought about this, the full shape of it. Someone had looked at an unremarkable cafe in Mapogu, at an unremarkable woman working a counter, and had decided, months before the gala, months before Min-jun spoke, that she was worth watching, worth documenting, worth building a file on. Her legs were fine. She noticed this with some surprise. She'd expected them to feel different, shaker, less solid, but they were fine. It was her hands again, the left one, the same low tremor she'd suppressed at the table yesterday. She pressed it flat against the counter. "Turn it off," she said. Auntie Kim turned it off. In the silence, Nia became aware that there were 4 customers in the cafe who had all been watching either the television or her, and who were now very carefully looking at other things. "I need 10 minutes, she told Auntie Kim. "Take 20. She went into the small back room where they kept the supplies and the spare equipment and a folding chair that had been there since before Nia started working here. She sat on the chair. She called her agency, the catering company, and the call went to voicemail. She called back. Voicemail again. She sat with the phone in her hand and looked at the wall. The photographs had been taken months ago, which meant the documentation about her visa denial had also been assembled in advance, which meant someone had been constructing this. The full architecture of the attack, the real documents arranged around a fabricated narrative, before Min-jun ever spoke a word. Before the gala. Before any of it. The plan had not been reactive. It had been waiting. She thought about who had the resources and the motivation to pre-build a case against a woman who was, by every metric, nobody. Who had reason to surveil a neighborhood cafe in Mapogu before there was any reason to surveil it. Someone who had known that Tae-jun took his son to that cafe. Someone close enough to the family to know the routine. Someone who had looked at an unremarkable catering worker being kind to a grieving child and had decided, months before anyone else, that this was a threat worth neutralizing. Nia sat in the supply room and felt the full cold geometry of it settle over her. Then she took out the card, the one with the handwritten number. She called it. He answered on the second ring. Nia, the photographs, she said. The ones on Cho Ye-jin's channel, of the cafe, of Min-jun arriving. A pause that told her he'd already seen it. Yes. Those were taken over 4 months. Someone was watching the cafe before the gala, before any of this. She kept her voice level. Who knew you were taking Min-jun there? Silence. A different quality of silence than his thinking silences. This one had texture to it, something moving underneath. Taijun. Her voice dropped. Who knew? Seoyeon. The word came out flat. She knew. I mentioned it. Once, 2 months ago. I told her Min-jun had found a place he liked to sit and watch the street, that it seemed to be helping. He stopped. I didn't tell her where, but she could have had someone. She had someone watching us for months. Nia's voice was very controlled. She had someone photograph your son, to use as evidence against me. She let that land. That's what you're telling me. The silence stretched. I need you to understand something, Nia said. She could hear her own heartbeat now, which she usually couldn't. My daughter goes to school 2 blocks from that cafe. My life is in that neighborhood, and someone has been photographing it, documenting it, building a case, and the ammunition they're using is your images of your son, used to make it look like I was hunting you. Her voice didn't crack. She was obscurely proud of this. That's what she did, with a grieving child. Your grieving child. She heard him breathe. Once. Slow. I'm going to fix this, he said. You keep saying that. This time I mean it differently. Then fix it fast, because my agency just sent me a message. She'd gotten the notification while they were talking, the banner sliding across the top of her screen. My catering shifts have been suspended pending review of my conduct at the gala, which means someone got to them. She looked at the supply room wall, the mop handle, the stacked boxes of napkins, the small, ridiculous ordinariness of everything around her. I need that income. I have a daughter. I can't. She stopped, made herself breathe. I cannot lose that income. You won't. Stop promising me things. Nia. His voice came through the phone like something physical. I hear you. I hear everything you're saying. I am not asking you to trust me. I am telling you that I'm going to end this today. Not tomorrow. Today. She pressed the phone harder against her ear. Go back to work, he said. Be exactly where you are. Don't give a statement to anyone. Don't respond to any press. I need 4 hours. She sat in the folding chair in the supply room of a neighborhood cafe in Mapo-gu and made a decision that felt like stepping off something. 4 hours, she said. She hung up. She stood. She went back to the counter. She made coffee. She did not look at her phone. She served the 4 customers who were carefully not watching her, and she thanked Auntie Kim for turning off the television, and she worked the lunch hour with her hands steady and her face neutral and the card with the handwritten number in her apron pocket like ballast. Taejun called Hyun-soo before he'd cleared the park. Get me everything, he said. Every communication Seoyeon has sent through any channel we have access to in the past 6 months. I want the surveillance records from the Mapo Cafe, whoever was running that operation. I want the contract trail, and I want Park Jun-ho on the phone in 20 minutes. Sir, Park Jun-ho is, I know who he is, 20 minutes. He walked to the car that was waiting at the park entrance. He'd told them to stay back, give him the illusion of privacy, and they had, his security team, good at reading the register of his moods. He got in. The door closed. The car didn't move. Sir? His driver, eyes in the rear view. Give me a minute. He sat in the still car and thought about Seoyeon photographing his son. Thought about the specific mechanism of it. The patience. The months of it. The documentation assembled like a case file against a woman who worked 2 jobs and raised a daughter alone and had never done anything to anyone except notice a child that everyone else had stopped knowing how to see. He thought about what Yoonji would have said. This was not a thing he did often. He'd learned in the first year that going there too freely was dangerous. It opened something that didn't reliably close. But he went there now, briefly, deliberately. Yunji would have said, "You already know what to do. You've known since the ballroom. The only question is whether you're going to let the machinery stop you." She'd always called it the machinery. The whole structure of expectations and pressures and inherited obligations that ran the life around him while he managed the life within it. He'd spent 18 months letting the machinery run. "Drive," he said. The car pulled out. He had calls to make and 4 hours to keep a promise, and for the first time in 18 months, the heaviness in his sternum felt less like grief and more like something he'd been carrying by choice, that he was now setting down. It didn't feel like relief yet. It felt like the moment before a very large thing moves. The video had been live for 3 hours and 40 minutes when it was taken down. Cho Yejin's channel went offline 11 minutes after the video disappeared. Not deleted, suspended, the specific gray screen outcome of a platform action rather than a creator choice. The commentary across social media about this happened fast and loud. Censorship accusations, conspiracy theories, the predictable fractal of public attention eating itself. Nia knew none of this. She was in the middle of the lunch service. What she knew was that at 2:17 p.m., her phone buzzed with a message from her agency. The suspension of her shifts had been, the message said, an administrative error. She was reinstated immediately, with an apology for any inconvenience. She stared at this message for a moment. Then she put the phone back in her apron pocket and finished taking the order she'd been in the middle of taking. At 2:53, a different call came in, a number she didn't recognize, but she was recognizing patterns now, the cadence of unknown numbers in this new geography of her life. She answered. A woman's voice. Controlled, precise, and underneath the control, something that she would identify later as the specific sound of a person who has just been told, by someone with the power to enforce it, that they've lost. "Ms. Brooks," Han Seoyeon, "I would like to speak with you directly, if you'll allow it." Nia looked at Auntie Kim across the counter. The older woman raised an eyebrow. "I'll allow it," Nia said. A pause. "I owe you an apology." "Yes." "The lawyer was a threat dressed as help. I know what it was." Another pause. When Seoyeon spoke again, the control had loosened by a fraction. Just a fraction, but enough to hear what lived underneath it. "I loved her. Yunji. I loved her more than... She was the person I measured everything else against. And when she was gone, I couldn't..." She stopped. Started again. "I couldn't find the shape of what was left. And Taejun was there, and Minjun was there, and I thought, you thought you could be what she was." Silence. "You can't," Nia said, not unkindly. "Nobody can be that for them. That's not how this works." "I know that now." The voice was very quiet. "I think I've known it for a while. I just didn't want..." "Ms. Han," Nia kept her voice even. "I accept your apology. I hope you find something that's actually yours. But I need you to understand that my daughter's school is not a pressure point you ever approach again. In any form, through any channel." "I understand. I need to hear you say it clearly." A beat. "I will never direct any action toward your daughter or her school. I swear it." "Thank you." She hung up. She looked at Auntie Kim again. The older woman had the expression of someone who had been quietly watching a large event occur from a safe distance and was revising her estimates accordingly. "Well," Auntie Kim said. "Yeah," Nia said. She was still standing there, phone in hand, recalibrating the landscape, when the bell above the door chimed and she looked up and felt the bottom fall out of the afternoon entirely. Because the person standing in the doorway of Hidori's cafe was not Taejun. Was not anyone from his world, or Seoyeon's world, or the world she'd spent the past 48 hours being pulled into. It was a woman she had not seen in 4 years. Tall, natural hair pulled back, wearing a coat that had seen better years. She looked like someone who had been traveling for a long time and had arrived somewhere without being sure it was the right place. She looked, in the way of people you knew at a specific age, simultaneously exactly the same and completely different. She looked like trouble, the specific, intimate kind. "Nia?" The woman's voice. "I've been trying to reach you." The tremor was back in Nia's left hand. Not from exhaustion this time, from something much older and more specific. Because the woman in the doorway was Diane Brooks, her sister. The sister she hadn't spoken to in 4 years. The The sister who, the last time they'd spoken, had been standing in a courtroom in Chicago testifying about Nia's fitness as a mother in a custody proceeding initiated by Amar's father. A proceeding that had ultimately gone nowhere, had ultimately been dismissed, but not before Nia had spent 11 months and every cent she had fighting it, testifying for the other side. "I know," Diane said. Her eyes moved around the cafe, landed on Nia's face, and stayed. "I know you don't want to see me, but there's something you need to hear about the people you've gotten yourself involved with." She stepped fully inside. The bell chimed again as the door closed behind her. About Kang Tai-jun, about what he actually is, and what happened to his wife. The cafe was very still. "It wasn't an accident," Diane said. "The ground did not move. The walls did not move. The river outside continued its indifferent progress toward the sea. But something in Nia Brooks, something load-bearing, something she had spent 4 years in an ocean building, felt it. "Sit down," Nia said. Her voice came out flat. Not hostile, flat, the way a surface goes flat when all the texture has been pressed out of it by something heavy. She said it to her sister the way she would have said it to anyone who had just walked into the cafe carrying something that size. Diane sat. Auntie Kim looked at Nia once. Nia gave her the smallest shake of her head. The older woman disappeared into the kitchen and pulled the door most of the way closed behind her, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for Nia in the past 48 hours. The cafe had 2 other customers. They were at the far table. Nia went to them and told them quietly that she needed to close early and she was sorry for the inconvenience and the coffees were on the house. They read her face and left without argument. She locked the door. She sat down across from Diane. Her sister looked older. 4 years of older, which was obvious, but also older in the way that specific kinds of stress age a person. The kind that comes from something you did that you can't undo. There were lines around Diane's eyes that hadn't been there before. She held her coat in her lap instead of taking it off, like she wasn't sure she was staying. "You have 5 minutes," Nia said. "Start." Diane pressed her hands flat on the table. She had the same hands as Nia, their mother's hands, wide palms, fingers that tapered. Nia had always noticed this and had always found it faintly uncomfortable, this physical inheritance they shared despite everything. "I've been in Seoul for 3 days, Diane said. "I came because I work with an international financial crimes task force now. Civilian contractor, research side. I've been working it for 14 months. She stopped, gathered herself. Taejun's organization was flagged 2 years ago in connection with a series of financial transactions linked to a trafficking network operating out of the South China Sea. The investigation led to a man named Ryu Chang-min. You won't know that name. I don't. He ran logistics for 3 separate criminal organizations, including Kang's. He had information about the accident, about Yoonji's accident. Diane's eyes were direct. Whatever else she was, she had always been able to look directly at things. Ryu Changmin died 6 weeks ago, car accident. The task force believes it wasn't an accident. The room was very still. Ryu was the driver, Diane said. Not of the car Yoonji was in, of a vehicle that forced her car off the road on Bugak Skyway. He was contracted to do it, and the task force believes the contract came from inside Kang's organization. She wet her lips. There's a man named O.J. Wan, senior lieutenant. He's been running a parallel operation for 18 months, skimming, territory acquisition, the kind of thing that requires the boss to be distracted. She paused. A boss who's been distracted by grief works very conveniently for that kind of operation. Whoa! Nia's hands were flat on the table. She was aware of them the way you become aware of your own body when something has just threatened it structurally. You're telling me someone inside Taejun's own organization had his wife killed. I'm telling you that's what the evidence suggests, yes. And Taejun doesn't know. Diane's voice was careful. We don't believe he knows. His profile is consistent with genuine grief, not performance of it, but she stopped. But there's a second layer. Diane reached into her coat and produced a folded document. Printed pages, not originals. The kind of thing you carry when you want to show someone something without giving it to them. She put it on the table but kept her hand on it. Oh, Jae-won has been in contact with a journalist, not Cho Ye-jin, someone with more reach and less visibility. He's been feeding information about Taejun's operation, slowly, strategically, building towards something larger. She looked at Nia directly. And 3 days ago, after the gala, After your name was everywhere, Ochewan's people started pulling your file. The back of Nia's neck went cold. Not your immigration file. Not your employment. Diane's voice dropped. Amar's father. His address in Chicago. His new family. The custody dispute. She pressed the document slightly toward Nia. They're building leverage. Not against you. Against Taijun. Through you. If Taijun publicly aligns himself with you, Ojewan has a mechanism to destabilize him, to use you as a liability. Your history, your sister's testimony. She stopped. The word testimony sat between them like something that had fallen off a shelf. My testimony, which they have, certified court documents. Nia looked at her sister. I know, Diane said. Her voice cracked on it, just slightly, just enough. I know what I did. I know it doesn't. She stopped, pressed her hands harder against the document. He told me he was going to take Amar to another country, Amar's father. He told me if I didn't support his petition, he was going to... I was scared, Nia. That's not an excuse. I know it's not. It's not, Nia said. The two words landed clean and hard, and she did not take them back. I know. Diane didn't flinch. I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here because you are currently in the path of something that will destroy you, and I have information that might prevent it. She finally slid the document fully across the table. Oh, Chaiwan is moving tonight. The journalist has a story scheduled to publish in 18 hours. It will contain the custody documents, your financial history, my testimony, and a narrative that frames you as a calculated operator who infiltrated the Kang family's grief cycle to extract financial and immigration benefit. She met Nia's eyes. It will end you. In Korea and internationally, the diaspora coverage that's been positive, it will flip completely. You'll lose your residency review, your employment references, possibly Amara's school placement. Nia picked up the document. She read it without rushing. It took 4 minutes. Her face did not change expression while she read it, which required something from her that she did not currently have to spare, but she spent it anyway. She set it back down. Why are you here? She said. Why not go directly to Taijun's people with this? Because if I go to his people and Ojewan finds out, and he will find out, he has someone inside the security detail, Ryu Changmin's file disappears. The evidence about Yunji disappears. Ojewan is patient, and he's been building for 18 months, and he will burn everything rather than be exposed. Diane's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. You're the only person with direct access to Taejun who isn't compromised, who Ojewan hasn't accounted for, because you weren't supposed to matter. Nia looked at her sister for a long moment. The task force knows you're here? No. You came alone? Yes. Diane, Nia kept her voice very even. If you're wrong about any piece of this, I'm not. If Ojewan finds out you came to me, I know. Her sister's chin came up slightly. I know the risk. Nia stood. She picked up the document. She looked at the clock above the counter, 2:58 p.m. She looked at the card in her apron pocket. She looked at her sister's face, which was the face she'd grown up with, which was a face she'd loved and then lost and had been living without, and which was currently telling the truth. She could always tell when Diane was telling the truth. It was one of the most useful and most painful things she knew about herself. She took out her phone. She called the number. He answered in one ring this time. Nia, I need to see you right now. Her voice was flat and completely controlled. Not in a park, somewhere secure. I have information about your organization that can't wait, and I have about 30 seconds before I talk myself into thinking this is someone else's problem. A pause. 20 minutes. I'll come to you. Text me the address. Another pause. She heard him decide something. All right. She hung up. She looked at Diane. You're coming with me. Diane blinked. Nia, you have the source documentation. You have the chain of evidence. You're coming with me, and you're going to tell him everything you told me. She grabbed her coat from the hook. You came here to fix something, so come fix it. Diane stood. She looked, for just a moment, like the person Nia remembered. Before the courtroom, before the fear, before the thing that had broken them apart. Just for a moment. Then she put her coat on and followed her sister out the door. The building was not what Nia expected. She'd constructed something in her head, The penthouse, the armored lobby, the architectural language of a man who needed walls. What the address sent her to was a mid-rise building in Yongsan with an unremarkable entrance and a security desk staffed by one man who looked at her and Diane with the particular blankness of someone who had been told to expect them and had decided all his questions could wait. Hyun-soo met them at the elevator. He looked at Diane once, absorbed her presence, filed it, and said nothing. He took them to the 8th floor, to a room that was a conference room and nothing else. Table, chairs, a window overlooking a parking structure. Functional. Deliberately without the aesthetics of power. Taejun was standing when they came in. He looked at Diane and then at Nia and then at the document in Nia's hand. Sit, he said to both of them. Then he looked at Hyun-soo. Get Park Hyun-gi on secure line. Tell him it's a 4. Hyun-soo left. The door closed. Nia put the document on the table. This is my sister Diane. She's a civilian contractor with an international financial crimes task force. She's going to tell you everything. You need to listen without interrupting because we have... She looked at Diane. 17 hours, Diane said, before the story publishes. Taejun's eyes went to Diane. Talk. Diane talked. She laid it out the same way she'd laid it out to Naya. Clean, linear, no softening of the edges. Ryu Changmin, Bugak Skyway, Oh Chae-won's parallel operation, the journalist. The document package being assembled to use Nia as a liability. Taejun did not interrupt. He stood at the end of the table with his arms at his sides and his face absolutely still. And he listened to a stranger tell him that the accident that had taken his wife and silenced his son had not been an accident. That the man responsible had worked beside him, had sat in rooms with him, had offered condolences. When Diane finished, the room was quiet for a long time. Oh, Chae-won, he said. His voice was unlike anything Nia had heard from him, completely flat, emptied of everything except the name. Yes, you have the Ryu Chang-min documentation. Copies. The originals are secured with the task force. The journalist, Park Seong-ah. She works for an independent investigative outlet. Oh, Chae-won has been sourcing her for 8 months. She believes the story is about financial corruption. She doesn't know about Yoonji. She doesn't know what she's actually carrying. Taejun's jaw moved slightly. Something was happening in him. She could see it without being able to name it. Something enormous being processed through a body that had already been through too much and was now being asked to absorb this. Where's Oh Jae-won right now? He said. Hyun-soo, who had reappeared in the doorway with a tablet, answered. Evening debrief at the MAPO office. Standard Thursday schedule. He's been there since 4. Get me Lee Dong-hyun and Choi Sung-jin. Sir. Hyun-soo's voice was careful. If we move on Jae-won directly, and the journalist... I know. He picked up the document. He read it the way Nia had read it, without rushing, without his expression changing. He set it down. The journalist thinks she has a corruption story, which means she has a source she trusts and documentation she believes is clean. He looked at Hyun-soo. Find out who her editor is. Her actual editor, not the masthead. Someone who went to school with someone who owes someone. I want to call in the next 40 minutes. And Chae-won. Chae-won doesn't move until the journalist is neutralized. If he runs because the story got killed, we'll know. And then... He stopped. The flatness in his voice thickened. Then I'll deal with him. Nia watched this and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was a kind of recognition. The same mechanism she used when she was managing something that could hurt Amara. The triage, the sequencing, the specific discipline of holding the larger feeling back until the immediate thing was handled. She knew this. She just hadn't expected to see it in him. He looked at her. Are you all right? I'm in a secure room in Yongsan helping dismantle a criminal conspiracy, she said. Ask me something easier. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, just barely. Your sister. Diane, who had been sitting very still through the past 12 minutes, looked up. You took a risk coming here, he said. I want you to know I understand that. And I want you to know... He stopped. His throat moved. Thank you for what you brought to me today, whatever the cost was to bring it. Diane looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Nia. Something passed between them, the kind of thing that travels on frequencies that don't require words, that exist only between people who grew up in the same rooms and broke each other's hearts and are still somehow standing in the same spaces. She deserved someone to show up for her, Diane said quietly. Finally, Naya looked at the table. The next 3 hours moved the way crisis moves, faster than you expect in some moments, stopped dead in others. The rhythm of it, nothing like what movies suggest. It was phones and low voices, and Hyun-soo moving in and out of the room with updates delivered in the precise, terse language of someone managing multiple moving pieces simultaneously. The journalist's editor was a woman who had been in investigative journalism for 22 years, and who received at 6:14 p.m. A call from a source she trusted absolutely. A former colleague who had worked with her for 8 years and had no reason to mislead her. The colleague told her that the document package she was about to publish contained material that had been fabricated in part to frame a source, that the custody documents were real, but their framing was constructed, that the financial records had been selectively edited, that she was being used as a distribution mechanism for a targeted character assassination. The colleague offered to put her in contact with a task force liaison who could verify. The editor pulled the story at 6:47 p.m., pending verification, indefinitely pending. At 7:20, Hyun-soo came into the room where Nia and Diane had been sitting with cold coffee for 90 minutes and said, "Oh, Jae-won has left the Mapo office." Tae-jun, who had been on a call in the adjacent room, appeared in the doorway. Where? Moving toward Incheon, his personal vehicle. He knows. Tae-jun's voice was still that flat, emptied thing. Someone told him the story is dead. The source inside your security detail, Nia said. He looked at her, nodded once. Can you stop him? Yes. The word came out of him like something that had been waiting behind a door for 18 months. Yes, I can stop him. He looked at Hyun-soo. Lee and Choi are already on the Incheon Expressway, Hyun-soo said quietly. Good. He reached back and picked up his jacket from the chair. He looked at Naya. Something moved across his face that she couldn't fully read. Something that was neither the organizational calculation nor the grief, but something underneath both of them, older and less armored. I need to go. I know. Stay here, both of you, until I tell you it's clear. Tae-jun, his name, first time she'd used it. It came out before she'd decided to say it, and she didn't take it back. Be careful. He looked at her for 1 second, 2. I'll be back, he said. He left. Hyun-soo followed. The door closed and the room was quiet again, and Nia sat at the table with her sister and her cold coffee and the understanding that somewhere in this city, on a dark highway toward the coast, 18 months of carefully maintained grief was about to find the thing that deserved it. Oh Chaewon's car was stopped at the Seo-Incheon interchange at 8:43 p.m., not by police, by 2 vehicles that had been waiting in the interchange's secondary access lane for 40 minutes. The men who got out of those vehicles were not men who explained themselves or produced identification. They were men who had worked for Kang Tae-jun for a long time and who understood the difference between the ordinary work of the organization and the particular wait of a night when their employer's face had looked the way it had looked when he'd gotten into the lead vehicle. Oh Jae-won was removed from his car. He was not harmed. Not yet. He was placed in the back seat of one of the waiting vehicles, and the convoy turned around and drove back toward the city, and Oh Jae-won sat in the dark of the moving car and understood, with the precision of a man who had spent 18 years in this world and knew its outcomes, that he had been outrun. Tae-jun was waiting in a warehouse space near the Mapo waterfront. Industrial, concrete. The kind of space that existed in the inventory of the organization for specific purposes that did not require documentation. Oh Jae-won was brought in. He was 61 years old. Silver at the temples. He had the build of a man who had once been physically formidable and had let the years soften it without completely erasing the architecture. He'd been with Tae-jun's organization for 11 years. He had sat at the table at Yoonji's funeral. He had put his hand on Tae-jun's shoulder and said the things people say. He stood in the warehouse light and looked at Tae-jun and said nothing. Tae-jun looked at him for a long time. His hands were at his sides. His face was the face he showed rooms he was about to rearrange. Ryu Changmin, he said. Oh Chaewon's jaw tightened, a tell, just slightly. I'm going to give you one opportunity, Tae-jun said. His voice was very quiet. The quietness of it was the most frightening thing in the room, and everyone in the room knew it. 1. To tell me yourself before I tell you what I know, because the way this ends is different depending on which one happens first. Do you understand me? Silence. Oh, Jae-won looked at him. The calculation behind his eyes was visible. The assessment, the angles, the weighing of options. The old professional instinct of a man who had survived by reading situations. And then, perhaps because he read this one correctly, perhaps because the alternative was worse, he spoke. He told it the way men in his position tell things when they understand the situation is over. Not with remorse, not with drama. With the flat efficiency of someone filing a report, the territory he'd been building, the financial skimming, the problem of a boss too sharp to distract with ordinary means, the solution he'd constructed. Ryu Chang-min, the rain on Bugak Skyway, the car that had moved at precisely the wrong moment. He talked for 11 minutes. Taejun stood and listened without moving. When Oh Jae-won finished, the warehouse was absolutely silent. The two men who had brought him stood near the door with the stillness of people who understood they were present at something they would not speak of. Taejun walked toward him. He stopped 18 inches away and looked at Oh Jae-won. And the thing in his face now was not the organizational coldness and was not grief. It was older than both of those. It was the thing that lives underneath everything a man builds to contain himself, in the place where the building stops and the man begins. "My son," he said. The words came out very slow. "Watched his mother die. He was 4 years old. He sat in that car. And my son didn't speak for 18 months because..." His voice stopped, started again. "Because of you." Oh Jae-won did not look away. "You took her," Taejun said. "You took her from him. From a 4-year-old boy." His breath was audible now. "And then you sat at my table. You put your hand on my shoulder." A long silence. "I know," Oh Jae-won said. And the two words were, in their own terrible way, "I know," Oh Jae-won said. And those two words were, in their own terrible way, the most honest thing he had said in 11 years. Taejun stood 18 inches from the man who had taken everything and looked at him for a long time, long enough that the two men near the door shifted their weight and then went still again, long enough that the warehouse's ambient sounds, water somewhere in the pipes, the distant thrum of the expressway, became audible in the silence. He did not touch Oh Jae-won. He took one step back instead, then another. His hands stayed at his sides. His breathing was audible, and then it wasn't. He brought it under control the way you bring something dangerous under control, with the full attention of a man who has decided that what he does next matters more than what he feels right now. "Call Prosecutor Shin Myung-ho," he said, to the men near the door, not to Oh Jae-won. "Tell him I have something for him. Tell him it involves the Bugak Skyway incident 18 months ago. Tell him to come personally." One of the men moved immediately. The other stayed. Oh Jae-won looked at him. Something shifted in the older man's face. Not relief, not gratitude. Something more complicated than either of those. The look of a man who had expected one kind of ending and was being handed another kind, and was not entirely sure which was worse. "You're turning me over," he said. "Yes." "The organization is mine." Taejun's voice was very quiet. "Not yours anymore. Not in any configuration." He looked at Oh Jae-won one last time. "You made my son stop speaking. You understand that. Whatever the prosecutor does with you, that's what you're paying for. The rest of it is just paperwork." He turned and walked out of the warehouse. The cold night air hit him at the door and he stopped walking for a moment. Just stood in it. Let it reach through the jacket, through everything. He put his hand against the exterior wall, concrete, rough, cold enough to sting, and pressed it there and breathed. Unji. He let himself say her name in his head for the first time in months, without immediately shutting the room. Let himself stand in the fact of her for a full 30 seconds. The shape of her. The sound of her voice when she was impatient, which was often, which he had loved. The way she'd looked at Min Jun on the day he was born, like she'd built something she couldn't believe had worked. She had not gone off that road in the rain. She had been taken. He stood in that truth for 30 seconds. He let it be exactly what it was, without managing it, without filing it somewhere useful. Just the fact of it, enormous and irreversible, in the cold air outside a warehouse near the Mapo waterfront. Then he took his hand off the wall and called Hyun-soo. "It's done," he said. "Prosecutor Shin is being contacted. I need you to begin the internal audit. Full review, everyone Jae-won had access to. I want the name of the person in the security detail by morning." He paused. "And I need someone to drive Nia Brooks and her sister home safely tonight, personally, not a junior detail. You." Yes, sir. A pause. Sir, are you all right? Tae-jun looked at the waterfront. The Han somewhere beyond it, invisible in the dark, but present the way water is always present even when you can't see it. No, he said, but that's not the problem I'm solving tonight. He got in the car. Yunsu brought them home at 10:43 p.m. Nia and Diane sat in the back of the vehicle and did not speak for most of the drive. This was not the silence of two people who had nothing to say. It was the silence of two people who had too much and hadn't yet found the right order for any of it. The city moved past the windows. Seoul at night, all that light, all that organized energy, the vast, ordinary machinery of 10 million lives proceeding around the specific, extraordinary wreckage of theirs. They stopped at Nia's building first. Yunsu came around and opened the door, which Nia hadn't expected, and which she registered with the particular awareness of someone who was still recalibrating what her life looked like from the outside. She got out. She stood on the sidewalk. Diane got out too, and they stood there in the cold with the car behind them and the building in front of them, and the 4 years between them distributed unevenly in the air. You can't stay in Seoul, Nia said. I know. If OJ wants people, the task force will extract me tomorrow. I called my contact from the building. Diane looked at her. I have a hotel in Itaewon. I'll be fine tonight. Nia looked at her sister's face. Diane was 40 years old. She looked it. She looked like someone who had been carrying something for 4 years that she'd picked up without meaning to and hadn't figured out how to set down. The testimony, Nia said. Diane's jaw tightened. Nia? I'm not reopening it. I'm not asking for an explanation. She looked at her sister directly, the same way she'd looked at Seoyeon across the ballroom 3 days ago. Not performing anything, not managing it, just looking. I need to know one thing. When you were sitting in that courtroom, did you believe what you were saying? Diane held her gaze for a long moment. No, she said. Then why? Because I was afraid of what he'd do if I didn't, and I chose being afraid over being right. She said it without excuses, without the softening that people add to confessions when they want them to land as absolution rather than fact. That was wrong. I knew it was wrong while I was doing it. I've known it every day since. Nia stood with that. She did not forgive her sister, not standing on a sidewalk in Mapogu at 11 p.m. after the day she'd had. Forgiveness was not a thing she was going to manufacture because the moment seemed to require it. She had too much respect for what it actually meant to perform it. But she looked at Diane, her sister, the person she'd grown up beside, and she let herself feel the full complicated weight of that history without needing to resolve it tonight. Go to your hotel, she said. Stay safe. When you're back in the States, she stopped. We'll talk. Diane nodded. Her eyes were bright. She didn't try to make them something else. She's wonderful, Diane said. Amara, I saw her picture on your phone lock screen. A pause. You did that alone. All of it. You should know that I know that. Nia said nothing. Diane got back in the car. Nia stood on the sidewalk and watched it pull away, and then went upstairs and paid the babysitter and stood in Amara's doorway for 2 minutes watching her daughter sleep. Amara was sleeping flat on her back with her arms out like she'd fallen from a great height and landed in the exact position she'd intended. She did this. She had always done this since she was an infant. Nia had spent years marveling at it, the total physical confidence of her daughter's sleep, the way she occupied the mattress like she owned every inch. She was so certain, even unconscious, so certain of her right to be exactly where she was. Nia leaned against the doorframe and breathed. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she slept. 3 days later, Oh Jae-won was formally arrested on charges that prosecutor Shin Myung-ho described, at a press conference, as related to criminal conspiracy and obstruction. He did not mention Yoon-ji. Not yet. That part of the investigation was ongoing, protected, sealed by processes that moved slower than anyone wanted them to. But it was moving. The story that Park Seung-ah had been ready to publish never appeared. She spent 3 weeks in her editor's office reconstructing how her source had contaminated her material, and what emerged from that process was a different story about Oh Jae-won, about the organization he'd been secretly building, about the specific mechanics of how a man inside a criminal empire could use planted narratives to destabilize his own leadership. It was in its final form a better story. She told Nia this, later, in the only communication they ever had directly, a brief email that said, among other things, "You never did anything wrong. I'm sorry I was used as the mechanism. Nia read the email twice, filed it, did not respond. The visa extension came through 2 weeks after the arrest. She had not applied for it through any special channel. She had submitted the standard renewal paperwork she'd been planning to submit before any of this had happened, and it was processed normally, in the normal time, by a normal desk officer who had no idea who she was. She got the notification on a Tuesday morning between the breakfast rush and the lunch set up at Hidori's, and she read it standing behind the counter and then put her phone in her apron pocket and made a cortado for Mr. Choi. "Good news?" he said. He'd gotten comfortable asking her things again. The careful politeness of the week after the gala had faded back into the ordinary texture of a regular. "Yeah," she said. "Good news." Taejun called on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the warehouse, 3 weeks during which he had not contacted her, which she had understood and had also found herself thinking about in the specific involuntary way you think about things you're not thinking about. "I owe you an explanation," he said, "about the past 3 weeks. Why I haven't... You were handling your organization." "Yes, and I was handling..." He paused. "I was handling the information about my wife. It took me some time." She sat down at the corner table. The cafe was between rushes, 3 customers at the far end, Auntie Kim doing inventory in the back. "Are you all right?" "No," he said, "but I'm starting to understand the shape of it, which is different from the past 18 months. He paused. "The investigation confirmed it, officially, what your sister brought." A longer pause. "The prosecutor has Ryu Changmin's phone records. It's real. It's confirmed." She said nothing. She let him have the space of the silence. "Minjun doesn't know yet," he said. I'm working with his therapist on when and how. He's 6. He needs to know eventually. He deserves the truth." His voice was very controlled, the control of someone who had been practicing. "But not yet." "No," she agreed. "Not yet." "He asks about you." She hadn't expected that. Or she had, somewhere below the level of expectation she was willing to acknowledge. "What does he say?" "He asks if you're okay. He asks about Amara. Yesterday he told me..." She heard something in his voice change. Warm, slightly broken. "He told me that you always put the hot chocolate down on the left side of the table because he's left-handed. He said most people don't notice things like that." Her chest did something she wasn't going to describe. "He's right," she said. "Most people don't." "I'd like to bring him to see you," Taejun said. "If you're willing. No agenda, no..." He just misses the cafe. He misses the dog schedule. A pause. "He misses you." She looked at the window. Outside the street was November gray, a woman walking a stroller, a delivery bike threading between parked cars. The ordinary, persistent aliveness of a neighborhood going about its business. "Saturday," she said. "We open late on Saturdays, 9 o'clock. The dog usually comes past around 9:40. A silence that felt like someone setting something down carefully. "We'll be there at 9, he said. They came at 8:57. Minjun was in a red coat this time, not the charcoal suit. A regular kid's coat, red with a hood he hadn't pulled up despite the cold. He came through the door ahead of his father with the specific forward momentum of a child who has been waiting to go somewhere and has finally been allowed to go there. He stopped when he saw Nia. She was behind the counter. She looked at him. She nodded, the same nod she'd given him through the ballroom window. Not the patronizing head tilt, not the performance of warmth. Just, "I see you. You exist. That's fine. You more than fine." He crossed to the counter in 6 steps. He put his hands on the edge and looked up at her. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. "Is the dog coming today?" "Should be here around 9:40. He considered this. "That's 43 minutes. "Give or take. Okay." He looked around the cafe with the focused attention she'd watched him use before, cataloging, organizing, noting what was the same and what was different. Then he went to the table on the left, the one by the window, the one he'd apparently always sat at, and he sat down and looked at the street. Taejun came to the counter. He looked like a man who had been through something enormous and was now standing on the other side of it, not unscathed, but upright. He had the particular quality of someone who has stopped performing a version of themselves and is attempting, carefully and without much practice, to simply be the actual one. "Coffee?" she said. "Please." She made it. She put it on the counter. He picked it up, and they stood for a moment with the counter between them, and the sound of Minjun dragging his chair slightly closer to the window in the background. I'm going to be restructuring the organization, he said, over the next year. It's going to require a lot of decisions I've been avoiding. He wrapped both hands around the cup. I'm not going to pretend it becomes something clean. That's not honest. But I'm going to make it something I can look at. He paused. Something Minjun can look at. Eventually. That's a big project. Yes. Are you asking for my opinion on it? No. He met her eyes. I'm telling you because I want you to know who I am. What I'm actually dealing with. Not the version the press has, and not the version I put on for rooms. He held her gaze. You've been inside enough of my life in the past 3 weeks that you deserve to see the rest of it clearly. And then make whatever decision you make. With clear information. She looked at him. Kang Tae-jun, 41, who ran things that didn't show up in newspapers and was now attempting to become something accountable. Who had a 6-year-old boy who noticed which hand people used in timed dogs, and had saved his first words for a woman in a catering uniform because she was the only adult in his world who hadn't needed him to be okay. I'm not going anywhere, she said, but I'm also not reorganizing my life around yours. My daughter comes first. My work comes first. Whatever this is, she gestured between them. It doesn't absorb me. I'm not available to be absorbed. I know. I mean it. I know you mean it. Something moved across his face. That's part of it. That's part of why. He stopped, started again. You walked out of the most powerful room I've ever filled. You had nothing, and you wanted nothing, and you walked away. I have spent 20 years surrounded by people who want things from me, and in 40 seconds you made all of them look like a different species. She looked at him for a moment. I wanted something, she said. He waited. I wanted to make sure that boy knew his voice was worth using. She glanced at the window table where Minjun was watching the street with his nose slightly elevated, scenting November air through the glass. That's what I wanted. I'm not a saint. He needed something real, and I had it. Yes, Taejun said quietly. You did. The bell above the door chimed. Amara came in at 9:15, back from the Saturday morning art class at the community center 2 blocks over, still carrying her paper portfolio, her coat unzipped because she always forgot to zip it. She stopped when she saw the man at the counter and the boy at the window. She assessed the situation with the swiftness of a 7-year-old who had grown up reading rooms because her mother was good at reading rooms, and it was absorbed by proximity. She looked at Minjun. Minjun had turned from the window when the bell chimed and was now looking at Amara with an expression that was, for the first time since Nia had known him, something openly uncertain. A child for a moment, instead of the compressed, watchful person he'd been. Hi, Amara said, in Korean. Excellent Korean. Minjun blinked. Hi. Is that your dad at the counter? Yes? He's tall. I know. Amara took this in. Do you want to see my drawings? I made a horse, but it looks more like a very confident dog. Minjun looked at the portfolio. Then he looked at the window. Then he looked at Amara. The real dog comes at 9:40, he said. We have time. Amara sat down at the table without being invited. She pulled the portfolio open. Minjun leaned over to look, and in 30 seconds they were bent together over a drawing of a horse that looked like a very confident dog, talking with the easy immediacy of children who have not yet learned to be cautious about each other. Nia turned back to the counter. Tae-jun was watching their children. His face was... She didn't have a word for it. She thought about what she'd seen in the warehouse, and the park, and the ballroom, and all the iterations of this man across the past 3 weeks. This was different from all of them. This was what was under the architecture, what the architecture was protecting. His eyes were bright, just at the edges. He looked at the counter. He picked up his coffee cup. He set it back down without drinking. She's wonderful, he said. Quiet. About Amara. She is, Nia said. She came out that way. I can't take a lot of credit. I think you can. She didn't argue it. She watched the 2 children at the window table and let herself have the feeling she'd been carefully not having for 3 weeks. The one that had no tactical application. The one that wasn't useful. The one that lived in the specific place where exhaustion ends and something else begins. It was not love. Not yet. She was a woman who did not use that word until she meant it at a molecular level. But it was the thing that comes before love when love is earned rather than arrived at, The thing that felt like, I see you, I see who you actually are, and I'm still here. That was not nothing. In her experience, that was almost everything. At 9:41 a.m., the golden retriever appeared at the corner of Wolgok Row. Minjun saw it first. Of course he did. He'd been watching the street for exactly this since 9:38, by Nia's count. He sat up straighter. His hands went flat on the table. Nia put the hot chocolate down on the left side at 9:39 without announcing it. Minjun looked at the cup. Then he looked at her, from across the cafe, with those eyes that had his mother's depth and his father's attention. A look that said, "You did it again. You always do it." She shrugged. Like, "Of course I did. You're left-handed. It's not complicated." He looked back at the window. The dog came past. Big and gold and unconcerned, trotting with the particular self-possession of an animal that had done this walk 1,000 times and intended to do it 1,000 more. It paused at the cafe window for exactly 1 second, maybe the warmth, maybe the smell of food, maybe nothing, and looked in. Minjun pressed his palm against the glass. The dog looked at his palm. Then it moved on. Minjun watched it go. His shoulders settled. The thing that had been held in him, the remaining tension, the last of what 18 months of silence had built in the muscles of a small body. It let go by a fraction more. A fraction that added to all the other fractions of the past 3 weeks until the total was something measurable. He picked up the hot chocolate with his left hand. He drank it. He looked at Amara. "Your horse doesn't look that much like a dog." Amara looked at the drawing critically. "It looks exactly like a dog. The legs are horse legs." "You don't know that." "I know what horse legs look like." "Do you have a horse?" A pause. "No?" "Then how do you know what horse legs look like?" Minjun thought about this with genuine seriousness. "Books," he said finally. Amara appeared to accept this as a legitimate answer. She turned the drawing sideways and examined it from this angle. "Maybe it's a horse who wanted to be a dog," she said. Minjun looked at the drawing, at Amara, at the window where the dog had been. "That's possible," he said. At the counter, Tae-jun set his coffee cup down. He looked at Nia. She was already looking at him because she'd been watching his face while he watched his son, and she'd seen the exact moment something had shifted in him. Not broken open, not collapsed, but shifted. Like a thing that had been load-bearing in the wrong direction finally being allowed to carry weight the right way. "He's going to be all right," she said, not as a question, not as comfort, as a statement of observed fact from a woman who had been paying attention. Tae-jun looked at her, his jaw moved once. He pressed his hand flat against the counter for a second, the same gesture she'd seen him make against the warehouse wall, she realized. Grounding himself, making sure the surface was real. "Yeah," he said. His voice was rough at the edges. "Yeah, I think he is." A year is not a long time, and it is also an enormous amount of time, depending on what you're measuring. By the following November, the internal restructuring of Kang Tae-jun's organization had cost him 3 senior lieutenants, 2 external partnerships, and a significant percentage of a revenue stream that he had decided at 3 a.m. On a Tuesday, he was no longer willing to maintain. The losses were real. The men who left were not gentle about leaving. There were 2 incidents in the spring that Hyun-soo managed with efficiency and minimal visibility, and one in the summer that required the kind of direct negotiation that left Tae-jun with a bruised rib and a very clear understanding of which alliances were real. Prosecutor Shin Myung-ho formally charged Oh Jae-won with conspiracy to commit murder in the 8th month. The proceedings were sealed. They would continue for a long time. These things always did. Tae-jun told Min-jun about his mother in April. He did it in the morning, at the kitchen table with Min-jun's therapist present and a cup of hot chocolate getting cold in front of the boy, because neither of them was drinking it. He told him as much of the truth as a 7-year-old could carry, which was more than he'd expected. He told him that it hadn't been an accident. He told him that the person responsible was being held accountable. He told him that none of it, not one moment of it, was anything Yoon-ji had deserved. Min-jun listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Tae-jun finished, the boy was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She would have liked Nia." Tae-jun looked at his son. "She liked people who were honest," Min-jun said, with the particular authority of a 7-year-old stating something he has thought about very carefully. "Nia is honest, even when it's uncomfortable." He picked up the hot chocolate. "Iyama would have liked that." Taejun didn't trust his voice for a moment. Yeah, he said, when he could. She would have. Then, Diane called in March. The task force work had taken her to Brussels, then to Singapore, then back to Chicago, which she was reconsidering as a city for reasons she didn't fully explain. She and Nia talked for 40 minutes. It was the third call since November. Each one was slightly longer and slightly less careful than the one before. The scar tissue of 4 years of silence softening incrementally with use. They did not pretend the thing that happened hadn't happened. They did not pretend they were back to what they'd been before it. They talked about Amara and about their mother's health and about a restaurant in Chicago that Diane had been to and thought Nia would have opinions about. And at the end of the call, Diane said, "I'm glad you're okay. I need you to know, I'm glad you're okay." Nia sat with the phone after they hung up and looked at the wall of her apartment and let the call settle. "Was that Auntie Diane?" Amar called from the next room. "Yeah." "Is she okay?" "She's working on it." A pause. "That's what you say about things that are getting better." Nia looked at the wall. "Yeah, baby, it is." The wedding was small. That was the word everyone used afterward, small. And what they meant was intimate, controlled, stripped of everything that was not essential, which turned out to be most of what usually filled those rooms. 14 people. A restored garden space in Unpyeonggu that Nia had found and insisted on because it had old persimmon trees, and the light in the morning came through them at an angle that did something she couldn't articulate but felt was right. Auntie Kim, who cried through the entire ceremony with the absolute unselfconsciousness of a woman who has earned the right to cry at things that move her. Hyun-soo, who did not cry, but whose face did something in the vicinity of it. A handful of people from both sides of their lives who had been tested and were still standing. Amara was a flower girl. She took the role with a seriousness that made Nia's chest ache and scattered petals with the precision of a child who had rehearsed this exact motion 7 times the previous evening. Minjun stood beside his father. He was 7 years old, and he stood in his suit with the posture of someone who understood the weight of the occasion and was holding it carefully. He held the rings. He did not fidget. He watched Nia walk toward them through the persimmon light, and his expression was the expression she'd seen in the ballroom, the one she'd seen at the cafe, the one that said, "I decided this a long time ago. You're just catching up." When the officiant reached the part about the rings, Minjun produced them with both hands, ceremonially, like a person completing something they began a long time ago in a ballroom in Hanam-dong on a night when every adult in the room had missed what was actually happening. Taejun took the rings. He looked at his son first. Something passed between them, father and son, the shared weight of what the past 2 years had cost them and built in them and changed in the architecture of both of them. "Thank you," he said to Minjun, quietly. Just that. Minjun nodded once. Certain. Then Taejun looked at Nia. She was standing in front of him in the persimmon light, with a dress she'd bought herself from a small shop in Mapugu, and her hair the way she kept it, and her eyes doing the thing they did when she was paying full attention, which was completely. She was completely present. She was always completely present. He had come to understand over the past year that this was the rarest thing he'd ever encountered in a human being, and he had been encountering human beings in high-stakes situations his entire adult life. He put the ring on her hand. His own hands were steady. He noted this with mild surprise. He'd expected them to shake. "I've been watching you handle things alone for a year," he said, which was not the prepared words but was what came out. "You're better at it than anyone I've ever known. But I'd like, if you're willing, to be someone you don't have to do that with." Nia looked at him. "That's conditional on you learning to ask for help occasionally," she said, "which I've noticed is not your strongest area." "Fair." "And on Minjun keeping unlimited hot chocolate privileges." "Obviously." She put the ring on his hand, her left hand steady. "Okay," she said. "Yeah, let's do this." Someone, somewhere in the 14 people, laughed. It was warm and real, and the kind of laughter that happens when something true has been said in a way that matches its truth exactly. That night, after the small dinner, after the guests had gone, after Amar had fallen asleep in the car and been carried up to her new room in a new building with old persimmon trees visible from the window, Taejun found Minjun still awake. The boy was sitting up in his bed with the nightlight on, hands in his lap, thinking in the way he thought when something large was being processed. Taejun sat on the edge of the mattress. You should be asleep. I know. Minjun looked at him. Appa, can I tell you something? Yeah. I heard you. At the gala, when you made the promise. He said it simply, as if this was information he'd been waiting to put in the correct place. I was at the dessert table and I heard it on the speaker. I knew what it meant. Taejun looked at his son. I'd already decided, Minjun said. I'd been deciding for a long time, but I was waiting for the right moment. He paused. You gave me the right moment. Taejun thought about this. About a 4-year-old boy who had stopped speaking after losing the most foundational thing a child can lose. About that same boy, older and somehow simultaneously more fragile and more solid, sitting in cafes and watching dog schedules and taking careful inventory of the world and deciding, quietly, deliberately, with more patience than most adults managed, who was worth his first words. You planned it, Taejun said. A little. Not defensive, just accurate. You used me. Minjun tilted his head slightly. I gave you a way out. Taejun stared at his 7-year-old son. The elders were pressuring you, Minjun said, in the voice of a child who has spent 2 years paying very close attention to the rooms his father walked through. You didn't want to say yes, but you couldn't say no without a reason. I gave you a reason. He looked at his hands. And Nia was the right person. I knew she was the right person, so both things were true at the same time. The nightlight put everything in blue. The city was quiet outside the window. Somewhere in the building, a new family was assembling itself out of the specific wreckage of what they'd each survived, learning the new geometry of each other. Minjun, Taejun said. Yeah. You're 7. I know. Most 7-year-olds, I know. He looked up. His eyes in the blue light were completely steady. But Iyama always said I came out thinking. A pause. She said it like it was a good thing. Taejun sat in that for a moment. It is, he said. It's a good thing. Minjun nodded, satisfied. He lay down and pulled the blanket up and turned on his side. The new configuration. Not against the wall anymore. Facing the room. Facing outward. Appa. Yeah. The golden retriever's name is Harang. I looked it up. He closed his eyes. I think we should adopt her. She goes past the cafe every day at 9:40, and nobody seems to be in a hurry with her. She might be available. Taejun looked at the ceiling of his son's room, then at the window, then at the boy who had, at age 6, with 18 months of banked silence and the patience of someone much older and the uncanny instinct of someone who had looked at the world's adults and found them mostly wanting, walked across a ballroom and changed the coordinates of 3 lives. Who had seen what everyone else had missed? That the woman who didn't want anything was the only one worth wanting. Okay, Taejun said. I'll look into the dog. Minjun said nothing. He was already almost asleep, breathing even, face slack. Finally just a child. Just a boy in a new room with a new family, and the dog situation possibly, potentially, on the horizon. Taejun sat on the edge of the bed for another few minutes. Then he stood and turned off the nightlight and stood in the dark for a moment. He had not fixed everything. He would not fix everything. There were things in his life that did not fix. They were managed, negotiated with, accepted as the terrain rather than the obstacle. He understood this. He was 42 years old and he had built his life out of exactly this kind of reckoning. But his son was asleep facing the room. And downstairs, in a kitchen that was new to all of them, a woman who had walked out of the most powerful room he'd ever filled was making tea. Because she made tea when she couldn't sleep, and she'd told him this once, early, in the way you tell someone something small and true when you're deciding whether to tell them the larger things. He went downstairs. She looked up when he came into the kitchen. He asleep? She said. Almost. She poured a second cup without asking, put it on the counter. He picked it up. They stood in the new kitchen in the new quiet of a new life and drank tea in the particular companionable silence of 2 people who had survived enough to know that this, ordinary, undramatic, warm, was not the consolation prize. It was the whole point. It had always been the whole point. They just hadn't been able to see it until a silent boy decided to speak.